All right, let's dive deep into a really layered and complex topic today.
Yeah.
Civil unrest in Los Angeles. We're going to unpack events spanning over 3 decades.
That's right. We're zeroing in on 2 distinct moments, drawing out the parallels and contrasts based on the sources you've shared with us. We're looking at the 1992 Los Angeles riots, well known by different names in different sources, like uprising or rebellion,
Right.
linking them to recent events in June 2025.
Our source stack for this deep dive as well, it's fascinating. We've got articles, research excerpts, transcripts, even some social media posts. They cover everything from historical accounts and political commentary to, personal perspectives and hard demographic data.
And our mission here, as always, is to guide you through this material, pulling out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight.
Yeah, help make sense of it all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to understand the catalysts, the varied experiences, the official responses, and what makes these events relevant right now. It's about getting you informed quickly but thoroughly without getting bogged down.
Okay, let's unpack this then. According to the sources, the spark that truly ignited the 1992 unrest traces back to the Rodney King incident and, crucially, the verdict that followed.
Yeah, the sources take us back to March 3rd, 1991. Rodney King, involved in a high-speed chase, ends up stopped by LAPD and California Highway Patrol. But what made this particular incident so pivotal, the sources tell us, was a bystander.
George Holliday.
George Holliday, exactly. He happened to record the entire thing on video.
And that video, it's described across several sources. It showed King being repeatedly struck with batons, kicked by officers.
One source even points out the sheer number 56 baton blows.
56? Wow.
And it highlights the striking inaction of a sergeant present at the scene, just watching.
So the immediate impact, the sources say, was just explosive.
That video was broadcast widely, became a national focal point, and really intensely fueled conversations about police brutality, especially against the Black community.
Then came the trial. 4 LAPD officers, including that sergeant, were charged with assault and excessive force.
But, because of all the media coverage, the trial venue got moved.
Right, out of LA County.
To Simi Valley in neighboring Ventura County. And the sources emphasize a crucial detail about the jury there.
Yeah, the composition.
It included no members who identified as entirely African American. The breakdown was 9 white Americans, 1 multiracial man, 1 Latina woman, and 1 Asian American woman. Though the prosecutor, interestingly, was Black.
And the outcome, delivered on April 29th, 1992, just sent shockwaves.
Yeah.
All 4 officers acquitted on the state charges.
The reaction the sources show was immediate, intense. Los Angeles Mayor Tom Bradley spoke shortly after the verdict, appealed for calm, but also expressed profound anger.
He had this incredibly powerful quote, didn't he? According to the sources, he directly challenged the jury's finding.
Yeah, he said, "This jury told the world that what we all saw with our own eyes wasn't a crime. We saw what we saw. What we saw was a crime." Pretty direct.
Very direct. But then one source includes a perspective from Assistant Police Chief Bob Vernon at the time.
Right, who felt Mayor Bradley's strong remarks might have actually incited the riot.
He noted an increase in police incidents within an hour of the mayor's press conference.
It's fascinating how the sources present these 2 contrasting views right alongside each other, isn't it? No judgment, just here's what was said.
Exactly. And that same day, April 29th, unrest began almost immediately following the verdict, centered in south-central Los Angeles.
The sources detail specific incidents showing how quickly things escalated, a key flashpoint. Florence and Halldale. Police responded to a youth throwing an object, called for backup. Dozens of officers arrived and then roughly handled and arrested a 16-year-old, Shondell Daniels.
And he was known in the community, right?
Right.
So that treatment really agitated the already tense growing crowd.
Yeah, and another layer, an African-American U.S. Air Force veteran, Timothy Goldman, was there recording it with his camcorder, like another echo of the original King video.
So more documentation.
But the unrest wasn't just at that one intersection. Sources mention protests forming back at the original King beating site, too.
Lakeview Terrace.
That's the one, involving rocks, shots fired into the air, fires, and this quickly spread into wider rioting and looting in areas like Pacoima.
The sheer scale of 92 is just laid bare in the sources. The statistics are stark.
Yeah, 63 deaths, 2,383 injuries, over 12,000 arrests.
12,000. And the property damage, estimated at a staggering $1 billion.
$1 billion. That level of disruption, the sources note, it brought daily life to a standstill.
You saw major sports events postponed or canceled, NBA playoffs moved, Dodgers games, even horse racing.
Huge cultural events, too, like LA Fiesta Broadway, concerts all shut down.
And while LA was the epicenter, the sources do mention simultaneous unrest elsewhere, like West Las Vegas.
Right, placing these events within that broader, longer history of civil disturbances across the U.S.
Okay, so the sources don't just stop at the events themselves. They dig deeper, right, into the underlying tensions, the demographic shifts.
Exactly. They argue these created the conditions for such an explosion in 1992.
And this is where you see different interpretations emerge in the sources. Political figures, for instance.
Yeah, Bill Clinton, according to one source, blamed economic and social breakdown, urban decay, and used pretty harsh terms for looters.
Then you had Vice President Dan Quayle attributing it to a poverty of values, breakdown of family and social order.
And the White House press secretary at the time, Marlin Fitzwater, suggesting the root issues went back to the 60s and 70s. Again, important to note, these are presented as specific political viewpoints from that time.
Definitely. But a major factor highlighted across the sources is the dramatic demographic change in LA.
Huge changes. By the 1990 census, LA County didn't have a single ethnic majority anymore. And in the city itself, the breakdown was already vastly different.
The sources give us the numbers. For 1990, the city was roughly 40% Latino, 37% white, 13% African American, and 9% Asian American.
And if you fast forward to 2010, Latinos were the largest group at 48.5%, whites down to 28.7%, Asian Americans up slightly at 11.3%, and African Americans were 9.6%.
And this is a crucial insight from the sources.
Yeah.
This shift meant race relations weren't just black-white anymore. It became far more complex, multiracial.
And the sources suggest this actually intensified conflict between racial minorities, especially in areas like South Central. Competition for limited jobs, housing. The Korean American community is a key focus here in the sources, often referred to as Saigu,
which is Korean for 429, the date.
Exactly. Sources note their rapid population growth, high rates of self-employment, often in small businesses like grocery or liquor stores located in minority neighborhoods.
Yeah, the sources sometimes use that term middleman minority to describe it. And they explain it wasn't random factors like language barriers, maybe difficulty finding jobs matching their education, leveraging ethnic networks.
Right, and this positioning sometimes led to friction. One source specifically quotes Councilman Barry making comments about Asians coming in and opening up businesses and dirty shops. It really highlights the raw nature of those tensions.
The sources also present a critique of the model minority concept.
The argument, according to these sources, is that this idea, while seeming positive, inadvertently created a kind of perceived racial hierarchy.
Placing Asian Americans somewhere between whites and Black Latino communities.
Sort of, yeah. And this, they argue, masked the real struggles faced by some Asian Americans, especially those running businesses in economically depressed areas. It complicated cross-racial understanding.
What's really striking, connecting the past to maybe today, is the assertion in these sources that the underlying conditions from '92,
economic disparity, poor education, high unemployment, police brutality, racial discrimination.
Right, that those were the main causes, and according to the sources, they still continue in impoverished neighborhoods today.
Which makes building multiracial alliances today, the sources suggest, maybe even more challenging than in the past. It's not just about cultural chat, it's complex internal differences within groups, harsh economic realities.
They argue effective alliances need to focus on substantive issues, not just talk.
Yeah. And there's a viewpoint included from journalist K.W. Lee critiquing some established Asian and Korean leaders for maybe not fully connecting with immigrant experiences and perhaps failing to effectively build coalitions with other communities because of that.
Okay, so as the unrest unfolded in '92, the official response escalated, eventually bringing in the military, federal resources.
Sources describe Mayor Bradley discussing the possibility of federal troops. Warren Christopher apparently urged him to go for federal troops over the National Guard, arguing they were better equipped for riots.
And he contacted Washington.
Right. This led to President George H.W. Bush announcing the dispatch of U.S. Marines from Camp Pendleton.
They were staged nearby and, according to one Marine quoted, got a crash course in riot control training.
The National Guard was also called up and federalized at the same time.
So to understand the military's role, The sources walk us through the legal stuff, the Tecumseh Comitatus Act.
Right, which generally prohibits using the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines for civilian law enforcement.
This section.
The Insurrection Act. This law allows the president to deploy military forces to suppress insurrections or enforce federal law, especially if a state requests help. And PCA doesn't apply to the Guard unless they're federalized, which they were here.
Okay, but the sources offer different takes on whether 92 legally fit the definition to use the Insurrection Act.
Yeah, one California National Guard judge, Advocate General officer quoted, suggests it was a gray area, implying the decision might have been driven by fear, like officials breaking the glass in a panic.
Interesting. And the military's role, as depicted, mostly security and presence.
Largely, yeah. Described as just to be seen, it helped free up local law enforcement, allowed businesses, like Yvonne's grocery store mentioned, to start reopening.
There's also commentary suggesting the military might have held back a bit, maybe from a meek understanding of their full authority once the Insurrection Act was invoked.
Possibly. And while some Marines described it as mostly uneventful, sources do mention reports of attempted assaults on military personnel, sniper shots, drive-by shootings.
And that cautionary example of officers shot responding to a domestic disturbance with Marines.
Right. By May 10th, 1992, though, the Guard was defederalized. Marines withdrew.
But reflections from some Marines involved, shared in the sources, they saw value in it as preparation.
Yeah, seeing historical events like this as a mental walkthrough or immediate action drill for potential future crises, sort of learning from history.
Okay, so armed with all that context from 1992, let's turn to the recent events in June 2025. What do the sources tell us was happening in LA then?
Well, the sources specifically reference protests and unrest linked to anti-IC demonstrations.
And the nature of this recent unrest, especially as depicted in social media, cited in some sources, sounds incredibly chaotic.
Yeah. Looting, fires, vandalism, graffiti, reports of overwhelmed police and federal agents, large crowds, sounds of explosions blocking freeways, streets. Quite intense descriptions.
The official response, according to sources,
Yeah.
LA Mayor Karen Bass, other city officials addressing the public, they put a curfew in place.
Specifically for a downtown zone described as roughly a square mile.
And city officials, one source notes, stated the curfew's purpose was protecting people, businesses, explicitly not to suppress protest.
Right. They also mentioned establishing a unified command involving various law enforcement agencies working together.
Sources give numbers on arrests, too, for 2025. Over 190 total. Specific locations mentioned, like Commercial and Alameda and on the 101 freeway.
Damage estimates for 2025, sources say, aren't complete yet, but they describe millions in losses for some larger stores, widespread vandalism, graffiti.
And military or federal presence in 2025. Sources mention the National Guard protecting federal buildings downtown and in Westwood.
But the reports around Marines' deployment differ quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
One source, a TikTok video apparently, explicitly states President Trump is sending 700 U.S. Marines to the LA riot scene to protect government buildings and work with local law enforcement.
Nope.
Another source mentions rumors of 700 Marines, but notes uncertainty. So conflicting reports there in the material we have.
And this is where the sources present a really clear contrast. A local official, a downtown councilwoman.
Yeah, she's quoted in a source stating LAPD capacity was sufficient, criticizing the idea of needing outside forces like armies or the Guard, especially unsolicited.
She felt in the dark, called the president potentially taking power from the governor unacceptable. That perspective directly conflicts with those reports of federal presence and potential Marine deployment.
Definitely a conflict there. Meanwhile, LAPD operations, according to sources, included a Level 2 activation, which indicates coordinating significant resources, mobilizing personnel, really bolstering their downtown presence where the sources suggest the crisis was focused. It's a step up from routine operations.
Got it. Another interesting thread in the sources is commentary alleging mainstream media kind of downplayed the severity of the 2025 unrest.
Yeah, these sources contrast media descriptions like under control, peaceful, or a normal day with the reality they claim was shown in videos and social media from the scene. A real disconnect alleged there.
And finally, Rep. Maxine Waters, mentioned prominently in the sources regarding 2025.
Right. One source quotes her attributing the unrest to Trump started this. Other sources include accusations that she tried to capitalize on the anti-IC protests, was torched by feds, even attempted to enter a federal building.
She's also accused in some sources of spewing lies and maybe backpedaling on endorsing violence while still blaming Trump.
And social media reactions cited in one source equate her statements to rejecting what people saw with their own eyes and ears, kind of echoing that Mayor Bradley quote from '92 in a weird way, but from a different angle.
Okay, so looking at these sources side by side, definite connections, but also some stark contrast between 92 and 2025.
Yeah, based only on the material we reviewed, shared elements are clear. Significant civil unrest in LA, property damage, official responses involving police and some form of military or federal presence, and differing political reactions and interpretations.
But the differences are substantial too, according to the sources. The immediate triggers were distinct, right? Rodney King verdict versus anti-ICE protests.
And the scale, just based on the casualty and damage stats provided, seems significantly larger in 1992.
The political contexts, different administrations handling the response, that's highlighted. And crucially, the demographic landscape of LA has continued to evolve since 1990, which sources suggest adds another layer.
Absolutely. And the media environment, dramatically different. Social media's role in 2025 is a key point in some sources.
Plus, the perceived coordination, or maybe lack thereof, between local and federal responses in the 2025 sources, especially from that councilwoman's perspective, that seems different from the more unified, though debated, federal intervention in 92.
Yeah, it stands in contrast. And even the terms used, riots, uprising, unrest, rebellion, they differ between sources, reflecting different ways of framing these intense events.
So did the sources connect the underlying issues from 92 directly to 2025?
Well, while some sources definitely argued those underlying issues, economic disparity, police brutality, persist and were main causes in '92, the sources on 2025 focused more on the immediate anti-IC trigger and the response dynamics. Though the commentary about media portrayal does touch on broader themes of what constitutes disorder.
Well, this deep dive has really shown us the complex layers of civil unrest in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
just by pulling insights from this wide range of sources.
It really underscores how essential it is to look at multiple accounts, different perspectives, historical context, just to try and grasp the nuances of these intense situations. Events like these, as the sources clearly show, they just don't happen in a vacuum.
So to leave you, the listener, with a final thought drawing from these sources, when you consider that long history of U.S. civil disturbances mentioned in one source, and you add in the debates presented here about causes, responses, even how we define violence or insurrection in both 1982 and 2025, what does that ongoing conversation tell you about the persistent challenges facing major cities like Los Angeles, and maybe the country as a whole, in navigating deep social divisions and responding to public outrage? Something to mull on as you continue exploring these complex issues.